Hey guys, in this video we're going to be creating a DatoCMS plugin. So the plugin we're going to create is a very simple plugin, and it's basically going to allow us to select the language just like we can see in the environment settings within a DatoCMS project. So our plugin, we're just going to be able to click in this input area here and be able to select a single language. And we're not going to be able to select multiple languages for our plugin. So we'll just be able to select a single language, and the output of the plugin is going to be a really simple object. It's going to have a name. So in this example, it's going to be Chinese, and it's going to have a locale code or a language code. And that we can see here is the ZH. So let's get started and create this plugin then. If we go to VS Code, I'm already in my web projects folder. And from here, I'm going to npx create-react-app at latest, followed by the name of the plugin. Now, because the plugin we're going to create now is going to be public, so it's going to be available to search on the DatoCMS marketplace or the plugin repository website or whatever you want to call it. So it's actually going to be available for public use. So this isn't going to be a private plugin. So I'm actually going to publish this plugin after we create it now. So to do this, we need to prefix our plugin name with DatoCMS-plugin. So this means then DatoCMS will pick up that this plugin is supposed to be a public plugin and make it available to other users of DatoCMS to install on their DatoCMS project as well. So we're going to call it DatoCMS plugin language selector. And we're going to use a template. So we need to go --template. And the template we're going to use is DatoCMS-plugin. And we want to use npm with the --use-npm. Now, once that's finished up setting our project, let's cd into DatoCMS-plugin-language-selector. And I want to open this up in VS Code. So I'm going to go code dot. So now we're in our new DatoCMS project. So first things first is if we go to package.json, because we're using the latest version of Create React App, it's gone ahead and installed React 18. Now, when I've been developing plugins recently with DatoCMS, React 18 hasn't actually worked. So I don't know if it's because the DatoCMS plugin template hasn't been updated yet to work with React 18. However, a simple fix for this is to roll back to version 17.0.2 for React and React DOM. So we can go 17.0.2, and then we need to open a terminal and npm I to install those versions. And before you do this, actually, I recommend that you just npm run start, and just to see if there's any errors when you run your project using React version 18, because maybe by the time you're creating your DatoCMS plugin, React version 18 might work. However, for this video, I'm just going to roll back to version 17.0.2, and then I'm going to run npm start, and our project is up and running on localhost 3000. Now let's connect this up to our DatoCMS project then. Let's go to plugins and create a new plugin. And we want to hit this create new plugin here. The plugin name, let's call it language selector. And the entry point is going to be HTTP localhost 3000. So it's exactly what we see here. HTTP localhost 3000. It's not a legacy plugin and we don't need any permissions. So let's save this plugin. And now all of this in the plugin settings here is being rendered from our project. So if we go to source and entry points and config screen, this config screen here, welcome to your plugin, this is your config screen, is being rendered within the plugin settings here. We can see welcome to your plugin, this is your config screen. So let's update this text then. Let's go welcome to the language selector plugin. Let's hit save on this. And before I check it out, I'm going to add a prettier config file, and I'm going to set the tab width to 2. So let's save this and check out in the browser. And there we go, we've got welcome to the language selector plugin. So we don't need to do anything for our plugin settings for this particular plugin. What we want to do is be able to add it, for example, in a model. I'm going to go to my test model here. I want to be able to add this plugin as a new field, and where then when we go to create a new test model, I want to be able to select it. For example, we've got country here, but I want to be able to select the language. So we're going to do something very similar to what you can see here, where it's got select a country. However, we want to select the language. And I've already got all the languages in a JSON file. So I'll add the JSON file to the description so you can download this JSON file to be able to use it alongside this video. So that said then, let's discard settings. Let's go to our settings here. And actually we need to go back to our code and set up our plugin so we can actually use it for a particular field. So in our index.tsx, we can see we've got this connect here and render config screen. Now this connect takes a bunch of different options other than the render config screen. If we hit Control and space to get the IntelliSense up, we have a bunch of different options we can add to this connect. Now the first one we want to add is called manual field extensions. So what this manual field extensions does is we're going to return an array from this manual field extensions which specifies what field types this plugin can attach itself to, essentially. So if we go ahead and return then this array, and with each element in the array, we're going to assign an object. And because this plugin is a very simple plugin, and we only need to export JSON for this plugin, remember, whatever the user selects, whichever language they select from our language selector plugin, we're just going to output some very simple JSON. It's going to have a code for the locale, and it's going to have a name for that language. For example, the name for the language would be English, and the code for the locale would be EN. And because our output is a JSON object, then we want to specify to the manual field extensions that we want to attach this plugin to a JSON field. So in this object then, it takes a couple of different options. So we need to add an ID for this particular field. So the ID is going to be language selector. Then we need a friendly name. So exactly the same, it's going to be language selector. However, this is going to be used as labels within DatoCMS. So this is going to be client facing. So we want to format it appropriately. So we want to call it language selector. We want the type to be editor. So you may have seen briefly there, we have two options. We have add-on and editor. So an add-on is, for example, if we had a single text field and we wanted to add some information underneath that text field, then we're just adding on a little bit of information via this plugin to that particular text field. However, we don't want to add any information to a particular field. We want to actually create our own field and create our own user interface for that particular field. So we want to select editor for the type. Then the last thing we want to add is field types. Now we can add multiple field types if we want to attach this plugin to multiple different field types. However, we just want to attach it to a JSON field type. So now that we've set up the configuration for our plugin, we actually need to render some component that will take care of the user interface for our plugin. So we need to add another option then to connect, and this option is going to be render field extension. Now this render field extension takes two arguments. The first is the field extension ID, and the second is some context. So on the context object, we'll have a bunch of different things that DatoCMS provides to us from the DatoCMS environment, things such as theme variables and theme colors, as well as helper functions to be able to set a particular value when the user updates anything within our field. So if the user selects a particular language for our field, then we need to tell DatoCMS to update that particular value because the user has updated or selected a new language. So all of this is available on context. So that said then, the first one I mentioned is field extension ID, and this will be of type string. And this field extension ID will map to all the items in the array we have for the manual field extensions. And because we only have one, we're only going to ever have the language selector as the field extension ID. So the second argument will be the context, and this context will be of type render field extension context. So from here then, we need to check to see if the field extension ID is equal to language selector, then we want to render a particular component and pass in the context to that particular component. So let's go switch field extension ID. We want to go case language selector, and if it's the language selector, we want to return and render a particular component. Now this render function is coming from the top here from utils and render, and if we check it out in utils and render, it's just a wrapper function over React DOM render, and it will render a particular component for us. So let's go back then to index.tsx and use this render function then. And for now, let's just render a div and type in Jiminy Cricket. So let's check this out then in DatoCMS. Let's add a new field. Let's add a new JSON field. Let's go to presentation and select the field editor. And now we can see we have access to a language selector. So let's give this a name. Let's give it a name of language and let's hit save field. Now let's actually go and create a new test model then. And in our new test model, we can see we're rendering Jiminy Cricket. So obviously we don't want to render Jiminy Cricket. We want to render a select input where we can select a particular language from that input list. So back in our code then, instead of rendering this div, let's create a new component in source and let's create a new folder called components. And we want to create a new file called language selector.tsx, and we want to create a const language selector, and let's just return a div, put Jim in there and export default language selector. Let's save this and import this language selector component then in index.tsx. Instead of rendering Jiminy Cricket, let's render that language selector component, and we want to import it from components language selector. So let's hit save on this and take a look in the browser. Okay, great, we're rendering Jim. So we're rendering our language selector component now. And what we want to do is wrap our language selector component in a canvas. So this canvas can be imported from DatoCMS-React-UI. And this DatoCMS React UI is available as part of the DatoCMS plugin template that we used to create this plugin project right at the start. Within the language selector then, in the canvas is actually expecting to receive the context, so the DatoCMS context. So we need to destructure context from the language selector props, and we want to pass it down into the canvas, and we need to specify a type of props for the language selector. So the language selector is going to be of type functional component, and we're going to pass in that type of props to the functional component, and we want to specify context as, and let's copy what we've got here. It's going to be the render field extension context. So let's copy that there and import it from DatoCMS plugin SDK. We want the render field extension context. So then of course in index.tsx, we need to pass down that context into the language selector component. And let's take a look in the browser now, and there we go. We can see because we wrapped it in canvas, our font style has changed and updated to the font style of DatoCMS. So now all we need to do is add our JSON data for all the available languages that a user can select. So from here then we need to add our language data to our project. Now, like I said before, I'm gonna include the data file in the description below. So make sure you download the data file I give you in the description below so you can follow along with this video. So we're going to create a new folder in source called data, and in data I've already got the file copied to my clipboard. So I'm going to go ahead and paste the JS file containing an array of all our languages in data now. And there we go, we've got a massive array of all our languages, and these languages have actually come from DatoCMS itself. So I just exported all of the languages that you can select in DatoCMS to use, so we have consistency whenever we use this plugin. We know we're selecting from available options that are in DatoCMS anyway. So from here then, in our components and language selector, we want to import all our language data. So let's import languages from data/languages. And instead of rendering this hard-coded gem here, what we want to do is render a select field. So we already have access to the DatoCMS React UI, and it's exactly where we're importing the canvas from, and it's exactly where we're going to import the select field from. So what we want to do is make sure that the select field's value is equal to any language that we may have already selected for this particular field. So when we create a new record that's rendering this plugin for a language field, then obviously there's going to be no language selected, so there'll be no value. However, if we go ahead and select a language, we want to be able to tell DatoCMS to save that new value and save that new language that we've selected against that particular record. And then when we re-enter that record, when we click through back into that record, we want to make sure that the select field is pre-populated with the language we've already selected. So all of this can be done via this context object that DatoCMS provides to us. And first of all, then we want to retrieve the current value of this field. So to do that may look a little bit strange, what we're about to do now, because it's not just a value that we get. We actually get an object of all the form values for this particular record, and we also get a field path to this particular field. So we need to grab the path and find the value with the form values on this context. Now that may sound a little bit complicated, however, it's super easy to do. First of all though, you're going to need to install Lodash. So in package.json, I've already got it installed here. So you're going to need to npm I Lodash, and because we're using TypeScript, you're also going to need to npm I -D types or @types/Lodash. So it doesn't really matter if you install the @types Lodash as a dev dependency or a normal dependency. It's not going to matter. However, you just need to make sure you've got Lodash and the types Lodash installed. So once you've installed those, then we can import get from Lodash/get. And in our language selector component, then we can go const stringified value equals get, and we want to pass two arguments to this get. We want to pass context.form values and context.field path. So the field path is a dot notation, and what we can do is let's just console log the field path, so context.field path, and let's take a look in the browser just to see what that looks like. In our test model, let's give it a refresh, and we can see our field path is language. Let's console log before the field path then form values to see what we've got, and we've got field path title, country, international locales, and language. Now if we open up what we've got here, we can see title, country, and language. So our values for this particular record then are all stored against this form values. So if we needed to grab the title, for example, if we knew this record definitely had a title, then we can access it from this context from within the plugin. So from within a plugin, we have access to all the field values for this particular record, which is pretty cool. However, we're not going to need to use that in this video and in this plugin. We're not going to need to use any other field values or form values from this particular record. But just so you know that it's actually possible to do that, to retrieve other field values from your plugin. So what this get in Lodash is going to do is we're passing it an object as the first argument. So this entire object will be passed as the first argument to the get function. The second argument contains the key to retrieve the value. So it's going to return null because obviously we have no language selected. So let's go back to our code then, and let's get rid of this console log. And the reason I've got stringified value here is because whenever we store data or JSON data in DatoCMS, we actually need to stringify it first. So it's going to be a stringified JSON object. And we can easily just pass out that stringified value then whenever we need to use it. Because remember, we're saving a JSON object with this plugin for this particular field. So it's going to be a very simple object. It'll just have a name and a code. So whenever we select a language, for example, if we select Chinese as our language, the data that we'll save is this little object here with the name property and the code property. So let's go ahead then and pass out that object for a selected language. So let's go const initial value. I want to set that equal to json.pass, passing in the stringified value. However, this stringified value may be null. So we may not have an actual value, and that could be the case where when we first create a record, then obviously there's going to be no language already selected because it's a new record. So this field will be empty. And exactly the same if we want to remove a particular language, the field will be empty. So this field will have no value and we can't actually pass this stringified value. So we want to check then if stringified value, then we want to json.pass, else we can just return an empty object or set initial value equal to an empty object, and we need to cast this as a string. And because the value could be null as well, we could go string or null. So then now that we've got our initial value, we want to render our select field. So the select field's value is going to be equal to the initial value. And when we select a different language from the select field, we're going to hook into the onChange handler and update the value via DatoCMS using this context. So it's really simple to do. Let's go ahead and write the code and then we'll go over it. And I know I said we're going to use the select field from DatoCMS React UI. However, after recording this video and getting to the point of rendering the select field, it appears there's a bit of a bug with the select field where not all the options are shown, because in our plugin UI, it seems like there's an overflow of hidden. So a bunch of our options are actually hidden and we aren't able to select them. So for this plugin and this video, I'm going to use the native select. So first of all, let's add a strong tag and let's go selected language. And then underneath the strong tag, just a div with a native select. And within the native select, we want to loop over our languages. So let's go languages.map. And for each language, we want to return an option, and the label will be language.name and then in brackets language.code. So then because we're rendering from an array, we need to add a key prop to this option. Going to be exactly the same. Let's go language.name and language.code, and we're going to do exactly the same for the value. So we're just going to copy this. We could have saved this to a const really, but let's just copy that for now. Language.name, language.code. Then for the select, we want to pass the value, and the value is going to be initial value. And then on change, we're just going to have an empty callback for now. Let's just console log on change. So now if we take a look in the browser, we can see we have our selected language with the native select. We have a list of all of our different languages here, and it's pre-populating that first selected language. So we want to add another option here and give it an option of none. We're going to give it a value of blank. So let's save this. And now the default is a non-selected language. However, let's change this initial value. Let's quickly go const initial value and set it equal to, for example, Chinese ZH. So let's go name Chinese and code ZH just to make sure that this select is working. And obviously we've got an error here because we can't set a select value equal to an object. So we need to set it equal to this formatted string here. So the same way we've formatted this string, we need to format it for the value. So let's go initial value.name, initial value.code, save that. Take a look in the browser now, and there we go. We've already got our selected language as Chinese. So the last thing for us to do now then is update the particular field. So DatoCMS knows that this field is updated, so then we can save that new value for the newly selected language. So let's go ahead then, and in the onChange handler, what we want to do is tap into the context.setFieldValue. Now we need to pass the path, which is context.fieldPath. And we need to pass the value. So the value we want to pass is, first of all, we need to tap into the onChange event. So we need to check, let's go const new value equals e.target.value. So we need to check to see if there is an actual new value or not. So if there's no new value, then we just want to set our field to null. So which means if there's no value, the user has selected none. So we want to check to see if new value, let's just empty string for now, else null. So if there's no new value, then we just want to set our field value to null. However, if there is a new value, we want to find this particular language in our array of languages. So to do that, we can go languages.find. So we want to find the language which is equal to new value. So we want to make sure new value is equal to language.name and language.code. Exactly the same way we formatted for our value here and for the value in the select. So this should work now then. If we take a look in the browser, might have to give it a refresh. When we select a new language, and actually we've hard-coded it. So the initial value we've hard-coded to Chinese. Let's get rid of that and let's use the stringified value. So let's give it a refresh. So we've got our selected language is none. Let's try and select a new language. And it looks like we're getting an error. So let's see what that error is. And that's it. So we actually need to, like I said before, we need to stringify this object here. So let's go json.stringify. So let's save this now. Take a look in the browser, give it a refresh. Let's select a new language. And there we go. We have our select all hooked up to our languages. So let's go ahead then and try and save this particular record. Let's choose Chinese, for example, and hit save. Let's exit our model. Let's click in through to our model, and Chinese has already been pre-populated. Let's go ahead and change the value then. Let's choose Thai, for example. We can see that the save went from disabled to enabled, which means DatoCMS is picked up on this particular field change. Let's hit save. Let's go back, let's click through again, and we have Thai pre-selected in our select. So I'm gonna go ahead and tidy up the styles and things for this field so it looks a little bit more in line with DatoCMS's UI. So I'm gonna update the styling and things for this plugin at a later date. However, I'm gonna actually publish it for the very first time now to NPM so people can publicly use this plugin. So I'm going to remove this console log, and we need to prepare our project so DatoCMS can actually pick up and use this plugin and know of this plugin within their plugin marketplace. So in package.json, we can see we've got this DatoCMS plugin object. So we want to give it a title, a preview image, a cover image, and an entry point. Now the entry point is already populated for us, and this is going to be the entry point. The title is going to be language selector. The preview image, we're going to add that now. So we're going to create a new folder in the root directory, and we're going to call it docs. And within docs, I'm going to reveal this in Finder. I've already prepared the preview image and the cover image. So this is my preview image here. The thumbnail is a little bit small. However, I'll probably update it after the recording of this video. It's just simply a preview of the plugin in action within DatoCMS. So we're going to call this preview.png, and this is going to be the cover image. So this is what people see before they click through to your plugin, the nice little thumbnail for your plugin. So this is going to be cover.png. Now the cover.png has a dimension of 600 width by 400 height, and the preview has a dimension of 1600 width and 1094 height. So let's go ahead and reference the cover and the preview images then in our package.json. So now that we've got it in our docs, the preview image we need to specify as docs/preview.png and docs/cover.png. And obviously you can name these files whatever you want, but the key or the property for referencing the preview and the cover images has to be exactly like this: preview image and cover image. So now we've referenced our preview and cover images. We need to add a couple more things to package.json. So we need to remove this private, because obviously it's not a private plugin, it's going to be public. So we also need to add a files property, and this files property is going to expose after we publish our npm package. DatoCMS uses a site called unpackage.com, which will build our files and expose the built project via unpackage.com, and it's Dato that will reference those files for your plugin. And it's going to reference the entry point as build/index.html. Now, obviously we don't have a build directory in our project, and nor should we add a build directory to our project. However, because we don't want to add, for example, perhaps stale builds to our repository, we want any rebuilds to happen after we update and republish our npm package. So we want to expose these directories so they can be used from unpackage.com. So we just need to expose the build directory as well as the docs directory. So we need to make sure the docs and the build directories are public and exposed, so which will then mean DatoCMS can use this plugin from our build directory /index.html. So the last thing we need to add then is some keywords. And again, this is mandatory for DatoCMS. And the first keyword has to be DatoCMS-plugin. So we need to make sure we have a DatoCMS-plugin keyword. Otherwise, DatoCMS won't pick up that this is a public plugin to be used within DatoCMS. And I'm going to add a couple more keywords. I'm going to say language, and I'm just going to leave it at that actually, DatoCMS plugin language. I may add a bit more in the future. However, we're all good to go now to publish this package to npm. So I'm going to tidy this up a little. I've got a select field here, which isn't being used. Let's check. Okay, everything's good. We've got no warnings now. So what I want to do here then is npm publish from my DatoCMS plugin language selector directory. So I'm going to npm publish, and this will have published my DatoCMS plugin language selector to the npm repository. And I've just realized I haven't actually added a Git repository to this project. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. And so this plugin source code is now available at tomphil or github.com/tomphil/DatoCMS plugin language selector. Now, if you want to take a look at any other repositories I have, specifically, I do have a couple more DatoCMS plugins, and the repositories are all available publicly. So I have this DatoCMS plugin font awesome. I also have this DatoCMS plugin responsive widths. So if you want to check out either of these plugins to get a feel for a couple of different plugins or a couple of different examples of plugins for DatoCMS, feel free to check out those repositories. And before I end this video, I want to mention that once you've published your DatoCMS plugin, you should be able to find your plugin at marketplace/plugins. Now I'm going to search for language selector. However, you'll notice that my plugin, the language selector plugin, hasn't appeared here. And that is because these community plugins refresh every hour. So as you can see, the time now is 8:51. I'm going to come back to you in 10 minutes to show you that my plugin is successfully picked up within DatoCMS. And then also after that, I'm going to install that plugin rather than the local development plugin that we've been using. So we're going to install the plugin after that. And quickly before we do that, we've still got 7 minutes to go until DatoCMS refreshes their plugin list. However, you can head on over to, obviously your package name is going to be different. However, I'm heading on over to DatoCMS plugin language selector on npm, and you can see this is my new DatoCMS plugin language selector. So it's available on npm, so we know it got published successfully. And as well as checking on npm, you want to make sure that you check on unpackage.com. So this is the URL here, unpackage.com. You type in the name of your plugin. So mine's DatoCMS plugin language selector at the version number /build/index.html. And if you have no errors, that means your plugin was built successfully on unpackage.com. So then, because it's past the hour now, if we go to the community plugins on DatoCMS, I've searched for language selector, and here we go. My plugin has been registered with DatoCMS. We can click through, and it seems I got the dimensions for the preview image incorrect. So your dimensions should be 690 by 350, or any multiple of that if you're rendering for higher resolution screens. So that's just a quick aside there. Obviously, you might want to update your README as well. And if you want to add, if we go back here, we can see we've got no description available. To add a description, all you need to do is update your, update your package.json and add the description property in there with a short description of your plugin. And then that will appear as your description for DatoCMS. So quickly then, let's go ahead and update our DatoCMS project. If we go to plugins, let's remove the language selector because it's a private plugin. And also I forgot to mention as well, for the plugin settings, what you want to do is make sure you remove in our index.tsx, you want to make sure you remove this render config screen. We're not actually expecting any configuration for this plugin, so we can safely remove that config screen because we don't want to render, if we go into entry points and config screen, we don't want to render this context inspector because this is just for development purposes. This is just DatoCMS providing the entire plugin ecosystem API for us while we're developing our plugin. So we want to make sure we're not actually rendering this context inspector. I'm going to go ahead and update the plugin after this video to remove the config screen. So I'm going to go ahead and remove this render config screen because we don't actually need a config screen. So with that said then, let's go ahead and uninstall this language selector because it's the development private plugin. We want to go add a new plugin from Marketplace. We want to search for language selector. Let's select this language selector plugin, install this plugin, and then select the project you want to install the plugin to. And there we go. We've got our language selector plugin installed. If we go to models now and test model, we need to update our language field. Let's go to presentation and reselect the language selector. Hit save field. Let's go test this out then. We want to go to a test model. And there we go. Our language plugin is all hooked up and ready to use. And quickly before I end the video, I actually went ahead and updated the styling for the language plugin. So we can see this is the one we've created, and I've gone ahead and updated it to look a bit more in line with DatoCMS's UI. So it still behaves exactly the same. And also I sorted alphabetically the languages in the list because it wasn't alphabetical. So those are the two quick updates I made. And if you want to update styling or use the DatoCMS styling, then it's really easy to do because DatoCMS actually provides a bunch of CSS variables that we can use. So I've just styled the select like so. I've used their border color, their spacing, and the font colors and the font size. So to get that, we can just go to the DatoCMS docs, plugin SDK, React DatoCMS UI, and in introduction, scroll down and you can see all the different CSS variables available to us. They have text colors, UI colors, they've got font sizes, spacing, and it makes it really easy if you want to create custom components and custom UIs outside of the React components provided to us by DatoCMS, then we can use these variables to make sure that our UI is in line with the UI of DatoCMS. So it just gives the users using our plugin a better user experience because if they're using this UI, for example, it sort of detracts from the whole DatoCMS experience and UI. Whereas if we implement it like so with the DatoCMS styles, then it just feels a lot nicer and it feels like it's actually part of the app rather than a third-party plugin. So if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. Please subscribe to my channel and comment down below if there's any other topics or anything like that that you're interested in learning, and I'll be sure to cover them. So I will catch you in the next video.